Hello, my name is Bill Backus. I am the preservationist for the Prince William County Office of Historic Preservation. We are part of the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism. And today, along the Potomac River, Northern Virginia in the colonial era, we'll explore our region's history in the years before the United States is created. In Virginia, especially for the colonial era, that can be a fairly long period of history. If you're looking at European settlements starting in Jamestown at 1607 to the creation of the United States in 1770, 70, 80, that's about 180 years old, years of history. But for today, we're going to be focusing on the mid 1800s or the 1700s, when the area that we live in, Prince William County, was created starting in 1731. So we're going to be looking at the history from the 1730s all the way up to the Revolutionary Crisis in the 1770s. Now, you can see in this map right here of Virginia, right here, fairly large, but I want to start with this map because most Virginians, but not all, but most Virginians during this time period would be focused more eastward towards the Atlantic Ocean rather than towards the west in the interior of the North American continent. This is part of what historians call the Atlantic world. The Atlantic world is an exchange of ideas, of peoples, of goods, other commodities between the New World, the Americas, North, Central, and South America, and the Caribbean, and the Old World between the various countries in Europe and also in Africa. So it's not until after the American Revolution when the former British markets are temporarily closed that more and more Virginians, more and more Prince William residents start looking westward rather than the traditional eastward view. Prince William County, as part of the colony of Virginia, was part of the British Empire. And most people are more familiar with the height of the British Empire at the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, when the sun never set on the British Empire, when it contained landmass in all continents. But the first British Empire, first, in quotation marks, was significantly smaller. You can see on this map, all the British territory is highlighted in that dark red. And you can see the largest territory in terms of landmass is on the North American continent. And this map shows the height of the first British Empire immediately after the French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War in 1763, about a decade before the American Revolution breaks out. So you can see that, again, the British Empire's majority of the landmass was in the North American continent, but landmass does not equate importance for not only the British Empire, but for other European empires during this time period. In fact, these smaller islands right here in the West Indies, as part of the larger Caribbean area, were the most important colonies that not only the British, but the French and Spanish empires all had. These are all colonies that produced important crops, the most famous and most important of which is the sugar. And sugar in the 1700s is incredibly lucrative. There is a lot of wealth to be derived from sugar. And so the North American colonies are important. Many empires, especially like the British Empire, with its main 13 colonies on the Atlantic seaboard, view those colonies as important as potential markets for their commodities and also for raw materials. But for most Britons, the most important colonies in the New World are further south from the Atlantic seaboard and are actually in the Caribbean. So this is always important to realize, because especially today, viewing history through the lenses of the United States, we always view the 13 original colonies as the most important to the British Empire, during this time period. But in fact, the Caribbean was vastly more important to the leaders in London. But if you go onto the Atlantic seaboard, onto the North American continent, Virginia is the most important of all the colonies that English settlers form. It is the oldest. It is the largest in terms of landmass. This map gives a good representation of it. Even after the 1609 charters are significantly shrunken, there is a lot of land that is claimed by Virginia. So not only the Commonwealth of today, but also West Virginia, Kentucky, and most of the Midwest are all claimed by Virginia during this time period. So it's a huge colony in terms of landmass. It's also the largest colony in terms of population on the North American continent for the British. So there are a lot of people in the Virginia colony producing various items, mainly tobacco though, and tobacco, while not as lucrative as sugar, is still a very important crop for the Atlantic world. And so this also derives a lot of wealth for the colony. So Virginia is wealthy, it's big in terms of landmass, and it's also very well populated compared to the other colonies in North America. Now looking a little bit further inwards to Northern Virginia, this is a good map that preludes what we're going to be exploring in more depth in a little bit. This really cool map that shows really where most of English settlements or European settlements are being formed in the mid 1700s. And you can see most of those settlements are along the river, along waterways. Once you start getting into the interior of the country, the settlements become a lot more sparse, a lot more fewer and far between. So you can see most of the settlements are initially along the waterways. Now, how is Prince William formed? We're a little bit more unique than other parts of Virginia. So Virginia is a royal colony. It means that it's no longer a private or semi-private colony like it was when it was created at the Jamestown settlement. It is run by the British Crown. But after the English Civil War in the 1660s and the restoration of the British monarchy, to reward families that supported its restoration, the British Crown started to give some prominent English families large land grants. And one of the families, the Fairfax family, received all of this land from the northern neck between the Potomac River and the Rappahannock River all the way up. So including the northern neck, all of what is now northern Virginia, and all the way into what is now the lower portion of the Shenandoah River Valley. So this is a very large land grant. The Fairfax families make a lot of money from the eventual sale of all these lands. Most of the Fairfaxes, though, they stay in England. And then they also do some sub-grants to other prominent English families who, again, stay in England and make loads of money through the sale of these lands. But some of these family members will actually come and settle in the New World. And so Prince William County is in the heart of this Fairfax land grant. And so this is why Prince William will be formed the way that it is as a direct result of this large land grant. So the county is formed in 1731, and initially it is a very big county. This is the original boundaries for Prince William. So you can see not only does it incorporate the current boundaries of our county and also the cities of Manassas Park, but also it's Fauquier, Loudoun, Fairfax, Arlington, and Alexandria. Very large county. But this is a story that repeats itself, and this is actually how Prince William was formed. All of this was at one point part of Stafford County. And when there's more people moving to the north and to the west, they broke off and formed a new county. And so eventually this is going to play itself out until we have the modern boundaries that we have today. So in the 1740s, within about 10 years, Fairfax breaks off and creates its own county. And just like the original Prince William, it's a large county, includes Loudoun. So Prince William has been reduced in half, but it's still a fairly large county. But that's going to change in the late 1750s when Fauquier breaks away, forms its own colony, form its own county, and we have the present boundaries that we have for today. Now, briefly transitioning of who this county is named after. It's named after this guy, Prince William, the Duke of Cumberland. He is a British royal family member, but he is not the eldest son to King George II, which means he is not in the direct line for succession for the English crown. So unlike his brother, who will be trained to become the next King of England and Scotland and Ireland, instead, Prince William embarks on a military career, and he will actually rise to command the entire British Army in the 1740s and the 1750s. He becomes a pretty prominent military commander. So he has not only this county named after him, he also has Cumberland County, which is in the Piedmont of Virginia, just a little bit west of Richmond, named after him. Other parts of Virginia are named after him, like Cumberland Gap. So when he's alive, he has a pretty prominent reputation. Unfortunately, his subsequent reputation deteriorates, because you can see in 2005, the BBC ranked him as the worst historical Briton who lived in the 18th century, mainly deriving from his somewhat controversial role as military commander during the Jacobite Rebellion in Scotland in the 1740s. During the Battle of Culloden, he earns the nickname Butcher, which really takes on a life of its own well after he's dead in the 19th century, when Victorian historians start to romanticize the Jacobite Rebellion. And if this is a romanticized story, there has to be a villain. And so he becomes the villain in many of these Victorian histories. And unfortunately, the legacy of the Victorian historians still permeate popular culture today. So unfortunately, Prince William has had a deteriorating reputation ever since the 1800s. But switching back to Virginia, to really understand Virginia, to really understand Prince William County, you have to look at tobacco. Tobacco really is driving every single facet of life in Virginia, in Prince William County. It is the basis of the economy. It's the basis of the social system. It is the basis of land settlement. It's the basis of immigration, either forced or voluntary. It is the absolute basis for every single facet of people's lives. And this will not change until in the years after the American Revolution, when the combination of factors start to make the production of tobacco in Northern Virginia just unprofitable. But it's going to change to other parts of Virginia, and Virginia actually, or at least portions of Virginia, will still be dominated by tobacco well into the 20th century. This engraving is a really good representation of this. You can see the white plantation owner deriving incredible wealth from these weeds, tobacco. It shows how it's being transported and how it's being transported into wealth for the people who produce it, and then also the actual physical people who physically labor to produce the crop. So this is a good representation of tobacco and its prominence in this area. And so this is a watercoloring that the National Park Service commissioned back in the mid 20th century, but it's a good representation of just the labor-intensive crop that is tobacco. This is not something that you can just plant and come back a couple months later to harvest it. To really make a very profitable tobacco leaf that will be good for smoking, they have to be really large. And so that means is basically every day you're going up and down into the fields, up and down these rows, picking any new leaves that are beginning to grow. You want all the energy that is being formed by these plants to be put into these already pre-existing large tobacco leaves. So you're going in through these fields every single day, picking all new leaves that are growing. And you're also going through and making sure there's no insects eating any of these very valuable leaves. So it's a very labor intensive crop. And everyone will be growing tobacco, from small farmers to even the largest of plantations. So everyone will be growing tobacco, which means that the economy is not as diversified as it will be later, which means when the price of tobacco starts to fall, it really hurts the entire economy. It hurts the economy, but also it really hurts the soil where it's grown as well, because it is a very hard crop on the land. It just drains the soil of nutrients. Probably you get about 5 years of good yield before the soil really starts to deteriorate to the point that it's just not profitable anymore. And so this is a time period that fertilizers really aren't used. So instead of trying to put nutrients back into the soil, since land is still fairly cheap, farmers, what they'll do is after those fields become exhausted, they'll just abandon those areas and go into woodlots, cut down all these trees, like this image, and plant new tobacco fields, which is an ecological disaster for many parts of Virginia, including Prince William. So this is a watercoloring by Benjamin Latrobe in the Fredericksburg area in 1798, just a few years after our time period. But things really haven't changed fundamentally with this watercoloring. You see a white overseer on this recently created tree stump overseeing 2 enslaved women, African women, not only clearing the forest, but also starting to get the soil prepped for eventual tobacco leaves. And this is a good representation, again, of the workforce for most of the tobacco fields in Virginia. You'll have some small free-owned or freeholders growing their own tobacco, but for the vast majority of people growing tobacco in Prince William County, they're going to be on free. So they're either going to be enslaved or they're going to be indentured. And we will explore the differences of both types of on-free labor in a little bit. But most of the tobacco will be produced by on-free people. And again, it's very labor intensive. After you can finally pluck those leaves, you have to get it ready to market, which means putting it into a barn for the leaves to cure. Because if they're green leaves, they're going to be really poor quality. And then once they actually start to cure enough, then you can start putting in what's called a hogshead, the really big wooden barrel, transporting them to a warehouse where they'll be inspected, and then like right here, and then afterwards be shipped to mainly Scotland to be sold. And this is a insert for the Jefferson Fry map. Again, the map that we saw earlier, named after the 2 people who produced it, Joshua Fry and Peter Jefferson. This is a very good representation of Virginia's economy during this time period, again, because you can see tobacco falling out of this hogshead, these really wealthy Virginians who are getting most of their wealth through the production of tobacco, but the enslaved Africans doing most of the actual work, either serving the results of tobacco, in this case, fine Madeira wine, and also transporting tobacco onto ships to be sent over to England and Scotland. And to give you a sense of size, hogsheads are actually fairly large. This is a hogshead that is being drawn by 2 mules. So again, it gives you a good representation of how big these barrels are. They are not small by any means. And this is one of the reasons why most people initially will be settling along rivers and waterways. It's just really hard and really expensive to move large quantities of tobacco over land on roads. because the roads aren't roads like today that are asphalted, that are nice, hard, well-maintained roads. They're very narrow dirt roads that are almost never properly maintained. And so it's going to be very hard and very difficult, increasing the price thereof, to transport any goods over land. And so you're going to be transporting it over water if you can. So the focus is on the ship, because that's how most of the tobacco is going to be going to market. But even if you can put your tobacco on a small boat like this right here, it's going to be a lot cheaper and easier than having those hogsheads be dragged or rolled by mules or ox over land. And so again, most of the initial settlement will be along waterways. This is a good map that shows some of these warehouses that are popping up. Unfortunately, it doesn't show the warehouses in Prince William, but it does show the emphasis on these waterways. Because again, if you can just get a little barge, something that can just float your tobacco down these streams into the rivers and into the ocean going vessels, will be a lot cheaper. So most people want to know where these streams are, because that's where they're going to initially settle after all the land directly on the Potomac River is sold. And so one of the most prominent settlements along the river is Dumfries. And it's going to be initially settled by this guy, John Graham, a Scot. The Scots will play a prominent role during this time period. John Graham comes to Virginia, buys large sections of southeastern Prince William County. He dabbles in tobacco, but he's also trying to diversify his economic holdings. And so he has some mills that he tries to produce, and he will eventually also be the big mover and shaker to get a tobacco warehouse formed in Dumfries, along, not coincidentally, along his property, thereby increasing the value of his land tremendously with that erection of this building. And that building may be this one. There is oral history to say that this is the tobacco warehouse that is formed in the 1700s. There's some other evidence that this might be an outbuilding for another building in Dumfries. We're not entirely sure. We do know that this building was around to the mid 20th century, over 200 years old, when it got so deteriorated that it fell down. But if this is the tobacco warehouse, this would then be the most important building in Dumfries, if not the warehouse, at least the inspection office, because after a couple poor shipments over to the merchants in Scotland, the Scottish merchants, who are dominating the tobacco trade for the British Empire, decide to set some quality controls. And because it's a lot of money to transport stuff across the Atlantic during this time period, if you're transporting really poor quality stuff along the Atlantic, you're wasting money and time. And so they're going to be putting their quality control measures in North America, in Virginia. So the idea is you would bring your tobacco to one of these inspection places. They would inspect your tobacco. They would give it a grade, and then they would put your tobacco in a warehouse until it's ready to be sold, shipped across the Atlantic, and then you would get different amounts of money depending on the grade of tobacco that you grew. And so this will be the main economic driver for Prince William, is these tobacco inspection warehouses. It's very important, especially in Prince William County, because this is a time period in which money itself really is not commonly had. And so there's not a lot of bills or coins floating around the economy. So instead, what you're doing is you're bringing the tobacco here, and you're giving basically receipts for how many pounds of tobacco you have. And most people are buying, selling stuff with those tobacco receipts. And not coincidentally, next door to these inspection warehouses are the main merchant houses, or the merchant houses for the main Scottish merchants that are driving the tobacco trade. So you can bring your tobacco to this inspection warehouse and just go right next door and immediately transform your tobacco into finished goods. And so this is one of the reasons why this community, Dumfries, will become so important to the life of Prince William in the 1740s when it's founded. And again, it's founded around Graham's tobacco inspection warehouse. And because that warehouse then drives everything else, this is going to make Dumfries so important. And so there was some debate about the navigability of Quantico Creek, because this right here is Quantico. There is a well-known story that the reason why Dumfries eventually dies is because the overproduction of tobacco causes runoff that will silt in Quantico Creek, and so ocean-going vessels cannot come up Quantico. There seems to be very scant evidence that any ocean-going vessels actually came up Quantico Creek directly. Instead, most of those boats stood in the Potomac River where it was deeper. So instead, what would happen is you'd have your ship anchor in the Potomac. They would put their goods onto smaller boats, and it would be rowed up Quantico Creek to these warehouses that you see right here on Quantico Creek. And then they would bring it into the merchant homes, and then you'd have the tobacco being transported on these boats going back down Quantico Creek and into those boats. The problem, what happens is later on, Quantico Creek does silt in, but it silts in to the point that even just small little vessels can't get up here. So people are having to, if you want to get down to where the boats are, transporting it over roads down to where the boats are, which is where Marine Corps Base Quantico is. So it's not that far, but it's still just more expensive to do that. So that's one of the reasons why Dumfries dies. So it seems like there is a myth that that ocean-going vessels could come up to Quantico Creek. It doesn't seem like that was the case. So the reason why Dumfries was such a thriving community was not because of any wars, but it was because of the inspection house for tobacco that was initially created in the area. And I alluded to this a little bit earlier. Scots are going to be the dominating force in the tobacco industry. This is a time period in economics in which the belief is on mercantilism. The colonies are created for the direct benefit for the mother country. And so the idea is the colonies are not to be trading directly with themselves or to other entities. They are supposed to be trading directly with the British. And then the British can then sell the various items back to any potential buyer. So either that be other Americans or other Europeans. So the idea is for every good being produced in the New World to go through one of those British merchants. That's not always the case, but for most tobacco farmers in Virginia, that will actually be the case. And for tobacco in our part of Virginia, it will be very quickly dominated by the Scots. And so this is John Carlisle, who is a very well-known Scot who comes over to Virginia and will settle a little bit further up the Potomac River at Alexandria. And so he and a lot of his Scottish compatriots will start to form a port at Alexandria. There will be a couple inspection warehouses in Alexandria, but the big benefit for Alexandria is you can actually get ocean-going vessels really close to those warehouses. There really is not a need to have a middleman of the items being shipped on smaller boats to get to those big ocean boats. Quantico is not not as convenient for the Potomac, and so Dumfries does have the same belief that it's going to be a fairly large community, but that does not have the benefit of having direct access to the Potomac River. But Dumfries does have some other things going for it. Because it's such a prominent community, there's a lot of people already going there anyways to buy and sell stuff. it will be selected as the third county seat for Prince William County after Fauquier breaks off. Prince William has had 6 county seats in its history. I think it is the most that any county in Virginia has. Originally, when Prince William was basically all of Northern Virginia, it was over by the Colchester area, but on the south bank of Occoquan. Once Fairfax breaks off, the second county seat is in what is now Marine Corps Base Quantico. When Fauquier breaks off, then the third county seat will be moved to Dumfries, and this is an architectural historian's rendition of the Dumfries Courthouse that will be in existence from the 1740s, 1750s, all the way up to the 1820s when it's moved to Brentsville. And so Dumfries is going to be a very important place for the life of Prince William County. And getting back real quick before we move on, again, the most important aspect of the tobacco trade will be these people, the tobacco merchants in Glasgow, Scotland. So this is, again, one of the reasons why you have Dumfries, Virginia, is because of that strong Scottish connection. And so this is a really neat snippet from the Virginia Gazette. So you can see all the boats coming in and out of the portion of the Potomac River where we live and seeing what they're carrying. So you can see going out what's being carried. So you can see a lot of tobacco, a lot of staves and raw materials. So a lot of staves for barrels and a lot of plank wood for other stuff. So you can see a lot of raw materials going out. But you also can see other stuff coming like sugar. And what's interesting, you can see outwards a lot of raw materials, almost all raw materials, but everything coming in is more finished materials like rum, cotton, people, enslaved people. So again, this is a zoomed in portion that you can see the ship St. Andrew of Dumfries, Scotland, not Dumfries, Virginia, owned by Andrew Kennedy of Dumfries, Scotland, not Dumfries, Virginia, had 417 hogsheads of tobacco, 9,640 staves, 769 feet of plank, a lot of pieces of heading and hoops. So there's just a lot of raw material going to Scotland. Again, this is a couple of years later, just to show the stuff coming in. What's neat, boxes of myrtle wax candles coming in. So again, it's an unequal trade. There really isn't any industry in North America. There are some infant industries like the Taylor Iron Works over by Neabsco Creek, but really those are exceptions rather than the rule. And so this is going to play some problems for the Americans during the American Revolution, because there is really no domestic factories that will produce any goods for the army or for the economy. But let's go and explore the people who are actually producing most of the tobacco and producing most of the wealth for this area. So we're going to look at indentured servants first. So indentured servants are mainly people coming from Europe. To transport yourself, to get from Europe to the British North American colonies can be somewhat expensive. But there is just a huge, just insatiable need for additional workers in Virginia. And so Virginians are going to eventually start to help pay for other people to come over from not only England and Scotland and Ireland, but also Germany over into Virginia. But because importing these people does incur some costs, they're going to have an indentured. So basically what this means is the person that is bringing over the people from Europe, they will pay for the passage across the Atlantic. They will pay for their housing. They will pay for their food while they're in Virginia, and also a little stipend. But in return for that, the indentured servant has an indentured which means that they are legally obligated to serve that person for at least 7 years. If they break any of the terms, the court system can come in and add additional years to the indentured servant's time. And so if you run away, like this article has it from the Virginia Gazette, showing a runaway indentured servant, you can have time added to your indentured servants if you're caught. But you have a lot of fairly impoverished people taking advantage of indentured servants to come to America. Because again, even though you don't have 7 years of your own labor actually producing wealth for yourself, afterwards you are able to leave that land. You can go and buy land, which compared to European farmers staying in the old world, which is almost impossible to buy your own farm, which is very much a different case in North America. So it's a good trade for a lot of people. So you do have people who voluntarily will come over and sell indentured servants, but sometimes they are not willing to come over. Again, this is another indentured runaway service, runaway advertisement. What's interesting is you can see a convict, because the British criminal system, what they'll do occasionally is they will basically say if you are convicted of a crime, you can serve your time in a British jail or prison, or you can be sold to a person in North America for an indentured service contract. And so sometimes you have the choice, and sometimes when the prisons are getting just overcrowded, one way to create more room is to unwillingly send indentured people to North America. And so you do have convicts coming over to Virginia. So you can see, like this one, other convicts coming in, being transported from London. Some Virginians aren't really too pleased that you have convicted criminals coming over to the United States, or not the United States, to Virginia, but they really don't have a say in the system. Unlike enslaved people, though, this is not a situation in which you pass on your indentured to any children that might be born in the indentured time period. So if you're indentured and you have a child, unlike an enslaved person, that unfree status is not passed down to future generations. And after that contracted year is up, or that period of years is up, you are a free person. There is no such thing as lifetime indentures. So it's on free labor, but it is not lifetime generational on free labor like enslavement is. And what's interesting is you have indentured people coming from all parts of the British Empire. Most of those people are coming from what is Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England today. But you also have other people coming from other parts of the British Empire, like this guy, John Newton, who actually is coming from the Indian subcontinent. He was an indentured servant. He was sold as an indentured to Colonel Blackburn of Ripon Lodge in Woodbridge, Virginia, and he runs away. So it's a very diverse amount of people coming in to Virginia during this time period. And so the indentured servants are creating a lot of wealth. This is one of the people who put an advertisement in, the Tabbs family. And this is a house that they have in Dumfries. This is it in the 1930s, right before it is demolished. But you can see what tobacco being produced by on free labor can produce. It can produce great wealth. So that's a building in Dumfries. And then the Blackburn advertisement we just saw about John Newton from India. This is a watercoloring of Ripon Lodge in Woodbridge in the late 1700s. So indentured servants are by no means the only type of unfree people who are becoming to Virginia to help produce tobacco. You also have enslaved people as well. But it's not only a Virginia story. You have millions of enslaved people coming to the New World, to either the British, French, Spanish, or Portuguese empires to help produce wealth for those European empires. This is a good map. I'm sorry for the poor quality. I was trying to get a better scan, but this is just a good visualization of where the vast majority of enslaved people are going. Yes, there are a lot of enslaved people going to the North American mainland, but the vast majority of enslaved people are initially going to either South America or to the Caribbean. The vast majority of people who are enslaved and who have to endure the Middle Passage are going directly to hellish conditions in South America or the Caribbean, not directly going to North America. And again, another representation. This is for the British slave trade. So we're just now focusing mostly on Britain. But it's interesting. Again, you can see during this time period, about 200 years from the 1500s to the 1800s, about 300 years rather, 121 enslaved people are going directly to the Chesapeake area. Compare that to about 500,000 people going to Barbados and St. Vincent. So again, a vast majority of enslaved people are going directly to the Caribbean. This is a little misleading though, however, because after a while, after a couple of years, there are going to be an informal interior slave trade between the British Caribbean and the North American continent. So you'll have people who are enslaved in Africa suffer the Middle Passage initially in the Caribbean and then shipped subsequently to the Chesapeake. Which means if you're seeing enslaved people in Prince William County during this time period, they can either be enslaved Africans coming directly from Africa, and you can see again in this map, there's different sections of West Africa that are sending enslaved people. So they're not a monolithic culture. So there's vast different types of cultures coming from Africa. So you have a melting pot in the Chesapeake area. Then you might have some who are born in the Caribbean. So you have enslaved Afro-Caribbeans who will eventually be sold up to the Chesapeake. And then you have Black enslaved Virginians here too. So you'll have a large variety and diversity of enslaved people in Virginia. And again, just not to belabor the point, but again, the vast majority of enslaved people would be directly going to the Caribbean rather than to North America. And again, this shows the profitability of those sugar plantations rather than the profitability of tobacco farms in the Chesapeake or rice farms in South Carolina. Initially, when Virginia is formed, it is the prominent location for enslaved people coming to the mainland. But again, you can see in this map, it is not the only destination. You have a pretty significant number going to New York and into New England. But in the years directly before the American Revolution, that starts to change, especially with the production of rice in South Carolina. So you can see there is going to be different areas that will have enslaved people coming to. But again, it is not a traditionally Southern institution. You do have people who are being enslaved and being sent to New England and New York, which was legal during that time period. And so what's interesting is you do have runaway slaves, just like you have runaway indentured servants. And what's interesting is the runaway advertisements that are put into the Virginia Gazette, that main Virginia paper, the enslaved descriptions in runaways are very, very similar to the indentured runaways. The only difference is enslaved people are enslaved for life. They're on free labor for life, rather than indentured servants who will eventually have the promise of becoming free at some point. Very rarely do enslaved people during this time period get their freedom. So you can see this is an enslaved person who's from John Taylor, who who had that ironworks at the Nyapsco area in Prince William County, and this is why he's running away from the Occoquan area. And what's interesting, you can see, I'm not going to belabor the point and read the entire advertisement, but it's really interesting because you can see what enslaved people were wearing. Unfortunately, this is one of the only few resources that we have to get a daily sense of what enslaved people actually live their lives. But you can also see where they're going. So he's going to South Carolina rather than to the northern colonies, because again, during this time period, there is no free or slave colonies. All the colonies legally allow slavery to exist. Again, more enslaved people who are being caught and thrown into Prince William County Jail, which during this time period is in Dumfries. So by the 1770s, this is all going to start to change. And this is a whole different lecture to talk about what's happening in the 1760s and the 1770s after the 70 Years' War and the cause of the American Revolution. But what's going to happen eventually is you'll have large sections of Prince William County who are going to oppose British policy. Once the revolution actually starts breaking out and there's an independence movement that's gaining a foot, there are some Prince William residents who remain loyal to the British. Most of those are fairly recent immigrants or British or Scottish merchants, but you do have loyalists in Prince William County when the war breaks out. The main results of the war in terms of Prince William County, yes, it's now part of a new state and part of a new nation, but what happens is those markets that were the lifeblood for Prince William before, during the colonial period, are now closed. So there really isn't a strong demand for tobacco. Tobacco prices start to crater in the 1780s and 1790s. And so there is less and less of a market for tobacco. And there's just really no compelling reason for people to move to Prince William anymore. So starting in the 1790s, Prince William will start to lose population every decade well into the 20th century. And so with people moving out of Prince William County, we actually start to have a more homogeneous population rather than heterogeneous population, with a lot of different peoples coming into this area. So after the American Revolution, Prince William County really starts to settle down into a very monolithic community. So if you're interested in further exploration of this time period, right here are some books that you can check out from your local library to read more about Virginia in the colonial time period. If you want more information about a really cool story about Prince William County, about the Talo ironworks that I alluded to in portions of this talk, this book, Irons in the Fire, is a fantastic book to read. If you want to get out and actually see some of these sites to yourself, to learn more about the history in your backyard, physically at some of these sites, I've listed a couple of these sites. There's 3 in Prince William that I would recommend. Ripon Lodge, which is that Blackburn farm or plantation. Historic Dumfries, which is William Spots, and Lisavania State Park, all in Prince William County. Check the websites for any additional COVID restrictions or regulations. And there's other sites in Northern Virginia that would be fantastic to explore as well. Gunston Hall and Mount Vernon are in Fairfax County. Carlisle House is in Alexandria, and Ferry Farm is in Stafford County. So these are all really, really great historic sites to explore this time period in more depth. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or call me, and hopefully we'll get that answered. And hopefully you've learned a little bit more about the colonial time period in Prince William County. Thank you.